Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the thrilling reality that history's most profound heroes very often completely shatter the mold of the traditional warrior. When we think of military legends, we usually picture people who are born for battle, following all the rules and fitting a very specific profile. But we're going to look at the historical data and some real-world accounts that prove exactly the opposite.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to explore three incredible, very different stories. The fugitive naval commander, the unarmed combat medic, the stray dog sergeant, and finally, we'll wrap up by defining true heroism. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. The Fugitive Naval Commander, From Murder Suspect to American Legend. We're kicking things off with a guy named John Paul Jones, whose journey to becoming the father of the American Navy started in just absolute chaos.
Okay, so his life spiraled out of control, like incredibly fast. Picture this. He takes command of a ship at just 21 years old after the captain dies of yellow fever, but he really lacked people skills. He faces a mutiny, accidentally kills the leader while punishing him, and then, months later on a different ship, he faces a second mutiny where he actually kills a man with a sword. Wild, right? So to avoid prison, he abandons his ship, flees to the American colonies, and changes his name to John Paul Jones just to lay low. He honestly thought his chance at greatness was totally over.
By the time he volunteers for the Continental Navy in 1775, he's looking at a literal David versus Goliath situation. We're talking a few dozen converted fishing boats going up against hundreds of the most powerful, purpose-built warships on the planet. Trying to fight the British fleet head-on was basically a death sentence, so Jones had to get super creative.
Because he absolutely couldn't win a direct fight, he used guerrilla tactics. He took the fight straight to the British Isles, raiding their ports and terrorizing their towns. In just a single month, his ship sank multiple enemy vessels and actually captured the HMS Drake after a brutal gunfight. Against all odds, this fugitive on the run had suddenly become a huge American hero. But his greatest and most chaotic test was still coming.
Fast forward to 1779. Jones is now commanding a converted merchant ship called the Boneham Richard. He runs right into a massive, brand-new 44-gun British warship, the HMS Serapis. He is completely outgunned and taking on water incredibly fast. So what does he do? He violently rams his heavily damaged, sinking ship right into the mighty British vessel, tangling their rigging together to force close-quarters combat.
As the ships smash together, the British captain looks over at this ravaged, smoking American ship and mockingly shouts, asking if Jones is ready to surrender. And over the absolute chaos of cannon fire, Jones shouts back his now legendary reply, "I have not yet begun to fight."
I mean, literally, everything was going disastrously wrong for him at this point. The cheap scrapyard cannons he bought exploded and killed his own men. An allied American ship actually started firing on him because the captain hated Jones. Total disaster. But right in the middle of it all, a sailor crawls out onto the rigging and drops a lucky grenade straight down a British hatch, detonating their gunpowder reserves. That single lucky strike, followed by some brutal hand-to-hand combat, somehow forced the British to surrender to a ship that literally sank the very next day.
Moving on to Part 2, the unarmed combat medic, bravery without bullets. We are leaping forward to World War II to focus on a deeply religious man from Virginia named Desmond Doss, who entirely redefined what it means to be a soldier.
It brings up a really profound question. How exactly does a soldier fight without a weapon? Well, for Doss, it stemmed from childhood trauma. He once had to watch his mother step between his drunken father and his uncle to stop his father from shooting him. Young Desmond actually had to run and hide the pistol. From that day on, guided by his strict faith, he swore he would never touch a gun. But when World War II broke out, he couldn't just sit on the sidelines, so he enlisted as a combat medic.
You can imagine his fellow soldiers and commanders considered him a massive liability. They just assumed he was a coward looking for an easy way out. They mocked him relentlessly. They threw heavy combat boots at his head while he prayed beside his bunk. They completely shunned him for observing the Sabbath on Saturdays, and a commanding officer even tried to have him court-martialed for refusing to carry a rifle. They basically did everything they could to break him.
But Desmond didn't break. He shipped out to the Pacific Theater with absolutely nothing but his Bible. And while he proved his bravery in Guam and the Philippines, his ultimate test arrived in Okinawa in May 1945 at Hacksaw Ridge. This was a hellish 300-foot cliff defended by a vast network of Japanese machine gun bunkers. It was an absolute meat grinder where wave after wave of Americans had already been slaughtered.
When Doss's company finally stormed the ridge, they hit a solid wall of lead.
The company was just shredded and forced to retreat back down the cliff, but they had to leave the dead and heavily wounded behind. While Doss, completely unarmed, stayed right at the top of the ridge. With enemy bullets flying everywhere and the terrible threat of torture if captured, he ran straight into the crossfire.
He absolutely refused to leave a single American behind. He'd drag a wounded man to the edge of the cliff, tie a special knot, and lower him down to safety. And after every single man he lowered, he paused in the mud and the blood and he prayed a simple, silent prayer. Please, Lord, just help me get one more. And then he would turn around and run right back into the danger.
Over an agonizing 12 hours, armed with absolutely nothing but his Bible and his faith, Doss single-handedly rescued 75 men. 75 lives saved by the exact same guy his unit previously wanted to throw in prison. For this unmatched act of bravery, President Truman awarded Desmond Doss the Congressional Medal of Honor, making him the very first conscientious objector to ever receive the award.
All right, Part 3. The Stray Dog Sergeant, a four-legged World War I tactician. Let's shift gears and head back to World War I for an incredible, palate-cleansing story about a stray Boston Terrier mutt named Stubby.
So, adopted by Private James Conroy at a military training camp on Yale's campus, this little stray dog goes from digging through the trash to being a soldier's best friend almost overnight. When the unit deployed in October 1917, Conroy just couldn't bear to leave him behind. So he literally scooped Stubby up, shoved him inside his heavy overcoat, and smuggled him onto a troop ship bound for the muddy trenches of France.
Now, Stubby wasn't just some cute mascot meant to boost morale. He actively saved lives. After nearly dying from a chemical attack himself, he actually learned the scent and acted as an early warning gas detector, running through the trenches barking to wake the men up. His super-sensitive ears heard incoming artillery way before humans could. He'd run into no man's land to find wounded Americans, and he even found a German spy mapping the trenches. When the spy ran, Stubby chased him down and bit his leg, knocking him into the mud until the soldiers arrived. Absolutely unreal.
For capturing that spy, Stubby was actually nominated for the rank of sergeant. Local French women were so amazed by his exploits that they knitted him a custom uniform. It proudly displayed his wound stripes from actual shrapnel injuries, a French campaign medal, and get this, the Iron Cross taken directly off the German spy he had captured in the mud.
His post-war life was just as crazy. Private Conroy and Stubby both survived, and Stubby returned to the U.S. a total hero. He met 3 different U.S. presidents and went to law school with Conroy at Georgetown. While there, he became the mascot, and during football games, he'd run out onto the field and nudge a football around with his nose, entertaining the crowds and basically accidentally inventing the modern halftime show. Not bad at all for a stray mutt.
Which brings us to Part 4, defining true heroism. Courage comes in all forms.
As we wrap up this explainer, there's a really striking thread connecting these vastly different figures. These stories prove that heroism definitely isn't about fitting a specific mold or having a perfect, clean origin story. John Paul Jones was a fugitive on the run. Desmond Doss was mocked and hated by his own unit. Stubby was just a hungry dog looking for a friend. But they are defined entirely by the extraordinary actions they took when the odds were overwhelmingly against them. So I want to leave you with this thought. If a fugitive, a pacifist, and a stray dog can change history, how do we truly measure the capacity for courage? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.